The first time the cops showed up at my house, I was elbow deep in changing the oil on my '07 Tacoma. One officer stood over me like I was fixing a bomb, hand hovering near his holster. "Sir, we received a report you were discharging a firearm in your backyard," he said. I blinked, looked down at the wrench in my hand, then back up, grease on my face. "In the middle of an oil change." He didn't laugh, neither did I, but I already knew who was behind it. Pamela Dorsey, president of the Fairview Pines HOA. Blonde, always wearing pastel tracksuits like she was heading to a tennis match that never existed, and permanently fused to her clipboard. She'd been gunning for me since I moved in 6 months ago. My lawn was too wild, my driveway had unauthorized vehicles, and apparently I walked too aggressively past her mailbox. "I'm Damian Heller. I'm a woodworker. I keep to myself." But Pamela, she had it out for me from day one. And now she'd escalated from HOA violation letters to calling the cops. That first visit didn't go anywhere. The cops left after realizing there wasn't even so much as a cap gun on my property. But then it happened again, and again. Over the course of 2 weeks, I had 5 separate visits from law enforcement. "Animal cruelty," one said. "Narcotics activity," said another. "Threatening behavior toward board members," the last one read off a clipboard. Each time nothing was found, I invited them in. Had nothing to hide. But I saw the shift in their faces: first suspicion, then confusion, then irritation. Not at me. At whoever was wasting their time. By the 4th call, one of the officers, a guy named Rodriguez, pulled me aside before leaving. "Mr. Heller, off the record, we know what this is. Someone's playing games, but these reports, they're being filed officially. That's not a prank anymore, that's a crime." That's when I knew I had her. I started documenting everything. I installed cameras facing my front and backyards. I kept audio logs of every encounter. I even mounted a dash cam in my truck that caught Pamela walking past my house muttering, "We'll see how long you last here, mister." Then came the 6th call this time, a full squad roll up. They claimed I was harboring stolen property. The cops went through my garage, saw nothing but lumber, tools, and a half-finished cedar bench. Rodriguez was back. He looked tired. "Damian, these reports, they're not anonymous anymore. She signed them." I raised an eyebrow. "Pamela Dorsey," he nodded. "That's all I needed." I took everything: video, timestamps, patrol reports, the false accusation letters, and walked it down to the county prosecutor's office. A friend of mine from college, Lucian, worked there. I hadn't talked to him in years, but when I showed him the evidence, his eyes lit up. "You're telling me she filed all of these reports herself?" "Signed, everyone," I said, "and I've got the body cam footage to prove every call was bogus." He leaned back in his chair, whistling. "That's 6 counts of filing a false instrument. Minimum." I left his office with a quiet satisfaction. 2 days later, Pamela was on the front lawn yelling into her phone when 2 county sheriff subs rolled up. I watched from my porch as they read her rights and cuffed her right in front of the HOA clubhouse. She screamed something about maintaining community standards and he doesn't belong here. I just sipped my coffee, the best part. The entire neighborhood was watching, phones out. No one stepped in, no one defended her. 3 weeks after Pamela's arrest, it was like someone had passed around a neighborhood-wide sedative. The HOA newsletter stopped showing up in my mailbox. The weekly patrols of clipboard-wielding volunteers mysteriously evaporated. And for the first time since I'd moved into Fairview Pines, I didn't feel like I had to glance over my shoulder every time I took my trash out. But peace wasn't the same as closure. The charges against Pamela had teeth. Filing a false instrument wasn't just a slap on the wrist in this county, it was a felony. And since she'd done it repeatedly, and under her official capacity as HOA president, the prosecutor's office was treating it like public corruption. Lucian called me about a week into the pre-trial proceedings. "I figured you'd want to know," he said. "We found out she wasn't acting alone." I sat up straighter in my workshop. "Come again." She didn't file those reports until after a vote from the HOA board. 3 of the other members approved them. They even helped draft the language. My grip tightened around the edge of the workbench. "You're saying this was coordinated? Worse than that," Lucian said. "The board minutes show they discussed ways to get you removed from the community." The phrasing they used: sustained pressure, targeted complaints, even escalated intervention. It reads like a blueprint for harassment. "Can you charge them?" "Right now, we're looking at conspiracy to commit false reporting and abuse of authority under municipal governance." I didn't see them at all after that. Their cars stayed parked. No more HOA meetings were announced. The bulletin board by the clubhouse, once meticulously updated with community schedules and passive-aggressive reminders, sat empty except for a sun-bleached flyer about raccoon sightings. I thought things would taper off from there, but then a man in a blue blazer knocked on my door one Thursday afternoon. He introduced himself as Elijah Brandt, an investigator from the State Attorney General's Public Integrity Unit. "We're expanding the inquiry," he said as I led him into my kitchen. "Turns out, Pamela's actions might have violated the HOA's charter, the state's homeowner association statutes, and potentially your civil rights." He laid out a folder on the table. Inside were copies of internal HOA communications, some of which I hadn't seen: emails with subject lines like "time to push him out" and "let's make it unbearable." Even one from Pamela to the rest of the board that read, "He's not one of us. He doesn't get to change our neighborhood." I looked at Elijah. "How did you get these?" "We executed a search warrant on Pamela's house and the HOA's office. She'd kept everything: paper trails, emails, even voice memos. She recorded herself dictating what she called containment strategies." I stared at the pages. "What were they trying to contain?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," he said. "This kind of coordinated harassment isn't just unethical, it's potentially criminal under the Fair Housing Act. If we can prove discriminatory intent, that opens up a whole new front." The next morning, Elijah returned with another man, a federal civil rights attorney named Marquez. They asked if I'd be willing to testify, not just about the false reports, but about the broader pattern of behavior. I agreed without hesitation. The hearing was scheduled for late spring, but in the meantime, the neighborhood began to shift in subtle ways. People who'd previously looked the other way started stopping by. A young couple from 2 doors down brought over a pie and apologized for not realizing how deep it went. An older woman named Clara, who'd lived here since the 70s, confessed that Pamela had once threatened to fine her for installing a wheelchair ramp without aesthetic review. "She made it sound like the rules were gospel," Clara said, shaking her head. "But really, she just made them up as she went." Then came the petition. It started with a woman named Jordan, a nurse who lived on the opposite cul-de-sac. She went door to door with a clipboard, collecting signatures to dissolve the HOA's current board and install an interim oversight committee until new elections could be held. "We need to fumigate the whole system," she told me on my porch one evening. "Not just Pamela. The whole culture." Within a week, nearly 70% of the neighborhood had signed. The petition was submitted to the county clerk, and under local governance rules, a special election was triggered. But Pamela, even facing charges, wasn't done. From jail, she filed an emergency injunction to block the dissolution vote, claimed it was mob retaliation. Her attorney argued that the entire community had been brainwashed by a disgruntled resident with an axe to grind. Lucian called me again. "You'll want to be at the hearing." I sat in the back row of the county courthouse as Pamela was wheeled in, wearing a beige suit and a sour expression. Her lawyer, a fast-talking man with a tie too bright for the room, gave an impassioned speech about precedent and dangerous populism. Then Lucian stood. "Your Honor, may I introduce into evidence Exhibit 14, an audio recording of the defendant instructing her board to fabricate police reports in order to break the will of a resident." The judge's eyebrows rose slightly. "Play it." The courtroom went silent as Pamela's voice filled the room, cold and calculated, We'll keep calling. Something will stick. They'll get sick of him eventually." By the time the audio ended, the judge didn't even hesitate. Injunction denied. Pamela's lawyer tried to object, but the gavel came down hard. Outside, a small crowd of residents had gathered. When I stepped out of the courthouse, someone started clapping. Then others joined in. I didn't wave. I didn't bow. I just nodded and kept walking. The real win came the next week. The special election went forward. Every old board member was replaced. The new board included Jordan, Clara, a high school science teacher, and a quiet man named Ruben who'd once been fined for repainting his door without approved hues. They didn't waste time. First, they voted to open all HOA financial records to the public. What they found was disturbing. Pamela had funneled over $25,000 into consulting fees paid to a company registered under her nephew's name. Another $15,000 had gone towards security upgrades, which turned out to be a series of cameras installed exclusively around her own property. Marquez, the federal attorney, pushed for a full audit. The forensic accountants uncovered even more kickbacks from a landscaping company in exchange for exclusive contracts, and inflated charges for maintenance that never occurred. In the end, Pamela wasn't just looking at felony charges for false reports. She was now facing wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The press got wind of it. Local news ran a segment titled "HOA Tyrant Indicted in Scheme to Oust Resident." They interviewed Clara, who didn't hold back. She thought she could bully us forever, but she forgot people talk. And when enough of us listened, her power disappeared. I watched the segment from my living room, saw the camera pan over my house, then cut to Pamela being led into court, wrists shackled. Elijah called later that evening. "You know this case. It's going to be used to rewrite policy at the state level. You might have just changed how HOA oversight works in the entire county." I didn't say much, just thanked him. That night I walked the neighborhood. Dozens of porch lights were on. People waved. For the first time, it felt like I actually lived there, not just survived there. They tried to run me out, but in the end, they ran themselves off a cliff. The first board meeting under the new leadership was held on a breezy Thursday night in the community park, not the clubhouse. The symbolism wasn't subtle. Folding chairs replaced leather swivel seats. Clipboards were replaced with open laptops and notepads. No podium, no dress code, no closed doors, just neighbors sitting in a circle facing each other. Ruben stood first. His voice was soft but steady. "We're not here to rehash what happened. We're here because it did happen, and it won't again." That night, a vote was held to create an internal ethics committee, 5 volunteers with no ties to the previous board and no authority to fine. Their only job, to keep the rest of the board honest. The motion passed with unanimous applause. I stayed after to help fold chairs. Ruben walked up while I was stacking the last row. "You planning on running for a permanent board seat?" he asked. "I build chairs, not policies," I said. He nodded, then leaned in slightly. "They're scared of you, you know, not in a bad way, in a how did we not know any of this was happening kind of way." "I didn't know either," I said, "until I had to." He paused. "There's something you should see. It's about the development fund, the one Pamela kept under lock and key." He handed me a jump drive. I didn't ask how he got it. I just took it home. The files were meticulous. Ledger sheets, scanned checks, emails, but one folder caught my attention. Expansion Initiative. Inside were blueprints. Property lines. Zoning applications. Correspondence with a private contractor based 2 counties over. The documents were stamped and signed, dated back nearly 3 years. They'd been planning to annex 3 adjacent lots into the HOA. Privately owned land, not part of Fairview Pines. According to the emails, Pamela and the old board had been pushing for those lots to be reclassified as under community governance through a quiet rezoning request to the county planning office. There was one problem: the land wasn't for sale. I printed out the documents and drove 40 minutes to a hardware store off Route 78, where the property owner, a man named Byron Callister, ran a supply business out of an old converted feed store. He looked up from behind the counter when I walked in. "You're the guy from that HOA mess," he said. "Saw you on the news." I laid the blueprints on the counter. "Did you ever agree to sell your land to Fairview Pines?" He squinted at the papers, then snorted. "Sell? They offered me a compliance incentive last fall. Said if I didn't agree to annexation, they'd file a nuisance complaint with the county." "And did they?" "They tried. County shut it down, said it wasn't even their jurisdiction." "You still have the letter," framed it, Byron said, disappearing into a back office. He returned with a manila envelope and a bitter smile. "Here's your smoking gun." Back home, I scanned the letter and sent it to Lucian along with a summary of the annexation scheme. It didn't take long for him to respond. "This changes everything," he said. "You just uncovered attempted land theft under the guise of municipal expansion. If they filed forged documents to push that through." "They did," I said. "The zoning application is stamped with a forged signature." I cross-checked it with the county clerk's office. "The person who supposedly signed it retired 2 years ago." By the following Monday, the county district attorney launched a secondary investigation. This time, the charges under review included forgery, attempted fraud, and conspiracy to unlawfully seize private property. The interim board held another emergency meeting. This time, the sheriff's office sent a representative to speak directly to the resident's Detective Sandoval, a tall woman with a stern face and a badge that looked too heavy for her jacket. "Let's be clear," she said. "This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a coordinated attempt to illegally absorb private land into this HOA's control using forged documents. That's not just unethical, it's criminal." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman in the back dropped her reusable water bottle. "And we believe this wasn't the first time," Sandoval continued. "We're reviewing past annexations to see if similar tactics were used." She paused, looking around the semicircle of stunned residents. People assume HOAs are private entities. But when they act like governments, when they collect dues, enforce laws, and attempt to expand their reach, they're held to the same legal standards. Pamela Dorsey and her board forgot that. After the meeting, Clara approached me while holding a worn-out folder. "I think this belongs in the hands of someone who'll use it," she said. Inside were HOA newsletters dating back 15 years. She'd kept them all. Handwritten notes in the margins, including one from a decade ago referencing a land reassessment strategy, and a meeting with a county official who'd since been indicted on unrelated corruption charges. I turned the folder over in my hands. "You ever think about running for the board?" "I'm 78, she said. "I'll be happy just seeing my garden without someone measuring it." The following week, subpoenas were issued to the contractor listed in the Expansion Initiative folder, along with one of the former board members who'd been mysteriously absent during Pamela's arrest. The contractor Rolled almost immediately offered a full affidavit in exchange for immunity. According to his statement, Pamela had paid him to draw up blueprints that made it appear the land was already part of the HOA. He claimed he was told it was a formality and that the county had pre-approved the expansion. He was lying, but at least he admitted it. The affidavit triggered a grand jury hearing. I was called to testify, not just about the false reports, but about the broader pattern of misconduct. The courtroom was cold, sterile, but the atmosphere buzzed with something electric. Justice wasn't just crawling forward now, it was sprinting. When I finished my testimony, the foreperson nodded once. No questions, no pushback, just quiet acknowledgement. 2 days later, the grand jury handed down new indictments, this time not just for Pamela, but for George Mallory and Brent Calloway as well. Forgery, attempted land seizure, and conspiracy to defraud the county. Teresa Ng had apparently fled the state, but a warrant was issued for her arrest. The news broke that afternoon. It made the state paper. A headline in bold: HOA's land grab scheme unravels, multiple indictments filed after whistleblower testimony. I wasn't named in the article. That was fine by me. But someone had leaked a photo from the courthouse. It was grainy, but I was unmistakably in the frame, standing in front of the courthouse steps. That night, someone left a bottle of bourbon on my porch with a note, "For making us feel safe in our own homes again." I didn't recognize the handwriting. By midsummer, the neighborhood had changed. Lawns still got mowed, but no one measured the height. Kids rode bikes without helmet patrols. The mailbox bulletin board was repurposed with recipes, garage sale flyers, and one pinned photo of Pamela's mugshot with a cartoon speech bubble that said, "Annex this." No one took it down. A month later, the county approved a new ordinance restricting HOA authority over non-member properties. It was dubbed the Fairview Provision. Jordan gave a short speech at the announcement. She mentioned me briefly, not by name, just a neighbor who reminded us that silence isn't the same as peace. I kept building furniture. Orders increased, mostly from locals. People wanted benches, porch swings, tables. Maybe they just wanted something solid, something made with care, something that couldn't be taken from them with a clipboard and a lie. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hedge line, Elijah Brandt stopped by. He didn't stay long. Just handed me a sealed envelope and said, "You should read this." Inside was an official letter from the Attorney General's office. It confirmed that Pamela had accepted a plea deal guilty on all 6 counts of filing false instruments, plus conspiracy. She'd forfeited her assets to cover court fines and agreed to a lifetime ban from participating in any HOA governance. The last paragraph read, "Without the testimony and documented evidence provided by Mr. Damian Heller, these outcomes would not have been possible." I folded the letter neatly and slid it into the back of a drawer. After Elijah left, I walked to the end of my driveway and stood there for a while, listening to the wind rustling through the trees. No sirens, no shouting. Just the sound of kids laughing down the street, someone grilling 2 houses over, and the leather creak of my work gloves as I pulled them back on. The neighborhood was quiet, but not because anyone had been silenced. This time, the quiet meant we'd finally been heard. The last of the courtroom lights flickered off behind me as I stepped into the parking lot, the weight of the formal letter still folded in my jacket pocket. The chill of late fall crept under my collar, but it wasn't the cold that made me pause before unlocking my truck. It was the silence. Not the kind that follows a storm, but the kind that settles when something big ends and the pieces stop moving. Pamela's sentencing was scheduled for the following week. The plea deal had spared her a trial, but the judge wasn't expected to go easy. Her attorney had mounted a last-minute request for leniency, citing stress and community pressure. But the prosecution's response had been blunt. None of that excused orchestrating a months-long campaign of deception. She'd be serving time. I drove home past quiet porches and dimmed windows. No more late-night meetings at the clubhouse. No more patrols. No more manufactured complaints. A few houses had new residents already. Word had spread fast after the indictments, and some of Pamela's closest allies had sold and vanished. Good riddance. At home, I parked in the driveway, headlights catching a glint of something tucked into the screen door, a small handwritten note on plain paper. I unfolded it under the porch light. "You should see this." Behind the old maintenance shed, a neighbor. The handwriting was careful, unfamiliar. I scanned the street empty. I thought about tossing the note, but curiosity won out. The maintenance shed sat near the woods at the edge of Fairview Pines, half forgotten and overgrown. It had once stored landscaping tools before Pamela had locked it up and declared it off-limits due to liability concerns. I hadn't thought about it in months. I grabbed a flashlight and made the walk down the gravel path. The air was damp and the shed loomed ahead like a rusted relic from a forgotten era. The lock was gone. The door creaked open with the groan of metal on warped hinges. Inside, everything was covered in dust shovels, a cracked wheelbarrow, a stack of disused fencing. But something in the back caught my eye, a series of cardboard file boxes sitting on a plastic tarp, sealed with duct tape. One had been sliced open already. I pulled the lid off. Inside were dozens of manila folders, each labeled with an address. Not just current homes in Fairview Pines, some had a red X drawn across them. Others had notes scribbled on the tabs. Hostile to HOA, missed dues, refused security audit. The handwriting matched Pamela's. I opened a folder marked Lot 23B. Inside were surveillance photos, actual printed images of a man sitting on his porch, unloading groceries, walking his dog. A typed list of times and dates was stapled to the back. I checked another. Same thing. Photos, notes, timestamps. Some folders had emails printed out between board members, discussing which homeowners might be vulnerable to pressure or likely to cave under scrutiny. I backed away from the files. This wasn't just overreach. This was targeted surveillance. A neighborhood-wide campaign to intimidate and document people who didn't conform. I called Elijah. He answered on the second ring. "You all right? I found something," I said. "It's bigger than we thought." He arrived 20 minutes later with 2 officers and a digital forensics tech. They collected everything, photographing each box before sealing them. I watched as they loaded the files into evidence crates under the beam of high-powered flashlights. Elijah rested his hand on the open truck bed. If what's in these folders is what it looks like, she wasn't just filing false reports. She was building dossiers. That's premeditated intent. The next week, the sentencing hearing was packed. Reporters lined the hallway. Pamela sat at the defense table, eyes sunken, her once perfect posture wilted. Her lawyer muttered something under his breath as the judge entered, but she didn't react. The prosecutor didn't waste words. "Your Honor, we now have evidence that the defendant maintained a covert neighborhood surveillance program targeting residents based on their willingness to comply with her directives. These were not benign records. They were used to coordinate harassment, justify false police reports, and pressure individuals into silence." The judge leaned forward. "Is the defendant aware of the contents of the boxes recently submitted into evidence?" Pamela's voice cracked for the first time. "I was protecting the community. You were weaponizing it," the judge said flatly. "You used your position to create an environment of fear, and you did so knowingly, repeatedly, and with calculated intent." She was sentenced to 14 years in state prison, no parole for at least 7. The courtroom didn't erupt. There were no cheers, just a long collective exhale. Outside, Elijah stopped me on the courthouse steps. "The state's reviewing every HOA in the county with a similar charter," he said. "Yours was the matchstick. They're calling it the Heller precedent." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. 2 months later, a new sign went up at the entrance to Fairview Pines. The old wooden archway with ornate lettering, "A Community of Standards," was taken down and replaced with something simpler. A hand-carved plaque on reclaimed cedar. I'd made it myself. It read, "We are our neighbors." The new board asked me to stand for a photo when they installed it. I declined. Let the sign speak for itself. One afternoon, I was sanding the edge of a reclaimed oak tabletop when someone knocked on my open garage door. A teenager, maybe 16, holding a clipboard. "Hi, my civics teacher said I should talk to you," she said. "I'm doing a paper on civil accountability and she said you kind of changed the law." I set the sander down and wiped my hands. "I didn't change anything," I said. "I just didn't let them get away with it." She smiled awkwardly. "Do you mind if I ask how you knew what to do? I mean." Most people would have just moved, I thought for a moment. You don't have to be a lawyer to know when something's wrong. You just have to care enough to keep track. She scribbled something down. "That's actually a really good quote." I chuckled. "Well, make sure you spell my name right." When she left, I looked around the garage, stacks of lumber, half-finished projects, a row of finished chairs lined up for pickup. It wasn't a fortress. It wasn't a war room. Just a place where things got built solid, honest, and permanent. That night, I walked the neighborhood again. Leaves crunched underfoot. Porch lights glowed soft and steady. A couple waved from their swing. A kid zipped by on a scooter, singing to himself. The clubhouse was dark now. The building had been repurposed into a shared library and community garden tool shed. The locks were gone. The doors stayed open during daylight hours. I paused at the edge of the lot, watching the wind stir the pages of a gardening book someone had left on a bench. No cameras, no clipboards. Just neighbors. As I turned to head home, Reuben caught up to me, hands in his jacket pockets. "You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't documented everything?" he asked. I try not to. "Well, thanks for not letting it swallow the rest of us." I looked at him. "You all pulled yourselves out. I just made enough noise that people looked." He nodded once. "We're having a barbecue next Saturday. Jordan's organizing it. You should come." "I'll bring chairs," I said. He laughed. "Fitting." And it was. In a place where people had once been measured by how well they complied, it felt good to be known for building something instead. Not just furniture, not just evidence, but trust. Something you couldn't annex, fine, or file away,